South Korea in the 1970s, a nation undergoing rapid transformation. Behind this transformation stood one man, Park Chung-hee. A former military general turned authoritarian leader, Park was both revered and feared. Under his iron-fisted rule, South Korea achieved remarkable economic growth, but it came at the cost of political freedom. Park's leadership sparked deep divisions. To some, he was the architect of South Korea's miracle on the Han River. To others, he was a ruthless dictator who silenced his opponents and clung to power. His rule, however, would come to an abrupt and shocking end on the night of October 26, 1979. In one of the most dramatic moments in South Korea's modern history, Park Chung-hee was assassinated by none other than his own security chief, Chae-gyu. This unexpected act of violence not only stunned the nation but also plunged South Korea into a period of intense political uncertainty. How did this seemingly invincible leader fall victim to such a betrayal? What led to this tragic event that shook South Korea to its core? In this video, we'll dive deep into the night of the assassination, uncover the motives behind it, and explore the lasting legacy of Park Chung-hee's sudden demise. But before we examine the assassination itself, we must first understand the complex political landscape that surrounded Park Chung-hee's rule and the mounting tensions that made this fateful night possible. In 1961, South Korea was a nation in crisis. The Korean War had left the country in ruins, its political system unstable, and its economy shattered. Against this backdrop, a 44-year-old military general named Park Chung-hee seized power in a coup d'état. His rise marked the beginning of an era that would transform South Korea from a war-torn state into an economic powerhouse. Park Chung-hee, driven by a vision of national prosperity, implemented sweeping economic reforms. Under his leadership, South Korea experienced rapid industrialization and modernization. Known as the miracle on the Han River, the nation's GDP skyrocketed, foreign investments poured in, and living standards improved. South Korea's transformation from an agrarian society to a global industrial player was nothing short of remarkable. Yet, this progress came with a heavy price. Park Chung-hee's rule was marked by authoritarianism, political repression, and an unwavering grip on power. He suppressed dissent, curtailed press freedom, and arrested opposition figures. His infamous Yushin Constitution, implemented in 1972, granted him near absolute power, effectively turning South Korea into a dictatorship. As Park's government grew stronger, so did the resistance against it. Students, intellectuals, and labor unions began to rise in protest, demanding political reform and democratic freedoms. His iron-fisted response to growing public dissent only deepened the division within the country. Despite his economic achievements, Park Chung-hee's rule created a country increasingly torn between rapid development and growing discontent. The authoritarian methods he used to maintain control fostered resentment, and tensions continued to mount. By the late 1970s, South Korea was on edge. While the nation continued to enjoy unprecedented economic growth, political unrest was simmering beneath the surface. Park Chung-hee's authoritarian rule was facing mounting opposition from all sides. Protests became a regular occurrence, particularly from students and intellectuals who demanded political reforms and an end to his dictatorship. One of the central issues fueling this discontent was the Yushin Constitution, which Park had enacted in 1972. This constitution essentially allowed him to extend his presidency indefinitely, eliminating any meaningful political opposition. What was once a republic had become a personalist dictatorship, and the Korean people were growing increasingly weary of Park's oppressive methods. Yet, it wasn't only the public that was growing restless. Behind the scenes, key figures within Park's own government were becoming disillusioned with his leadership. Chief among them was his trusted confidant and head of the Korean Central Intelligence Agency, Chae-gyu. Chae-gyu had long been one of Park's closest allies, responsible for overseeing intelligence operations and maintaining the president's security. However, Kim's relationship with Park had become strained. Disagreements over how to handle the growing unrest, combined with power struggles within Park's inner circle, created a rift between the two men. Another key figure in this drama was Chae-gyu, the powerful and fiercely loyal chief of presidential security. Cha was known for his hardline approach to suppressing dissent and for being fiercely protective of Park. His growing influence alienated many in Park's administration, including Kim Chae-gyu, who viewed Cha as a dangerous figure pushing the president toward even greater repression. As tensions mounted, Kim found himself increasingly sidelined by Cha. The conflict between the two escalated as Kim feared that Cha's influence would lead South Korea further into dictatorship. In Kim's mind, the only way to save the country, and perhaps his own position, was to take drastic action. In the fall of 1979, the political climate reached a breaking point. Students were protesting en masse, calling for Park's resignation. The military and police were called in to violently suppress the demonstrations, leading to widespread anger across the country. Park's rule, once seemingly invincible, now appeared increasingly fragile. On the night of October 26, 1979, events were set in motion that would change South Korea forever. Park Chung-hee, as was his custom, attended a private dinner at a safe house in Seoul, surrounded by a select group of confidants, including Kim Chae-gyu, the head of the Korean Central Intelligence Agency, and Chae-gyu, his ever-loyal chief of presidential security. It was a routine evening on the surface, but beneath the quiet dinner setting, tensions were boiling over. The strained relationship between Kim and Cha had reached a dangerous climax. Kim Chae-gyu, who had become increasingly disillusioned with Park's authoritarian rule and Cha's growing influence, had come to a fateful decision. As the dinner progressed, an argument erupted between Cha and Kim. The topic was the ongoing protests and how they should be handled. Cha, ever the hardliner, advocated for more violent suppression of the demonstrations, while Kim saw this approach as pushing the country toward further instability. The disagreement was sharp, but no one at the table could have anticipated what was about to happen. In a moment of unthinkable resolve, Kim Chae-gyu excused himself from the table, retrieved a pistol, and returned to the dining room. Without warning, he shot Chae-gyu at point-blank range, killing him instantly. The room was thrown into chaos. Park Chung-hee, shocked and bewildered, looked at Kim in disbelief. But Kim was not done. Kim Chae-gyu then turned the gun on Park himself. In a matter of moments, the man who had ruled South Korea for nearly 2 decades lay mortally wounded. The era of Park Chung-hee's authoritarian rule had come to a violent and abrupt end. The assassination of Park Chung-hee sent immediate shockwaves throughout South Korea. Within hours, news of the president's death began to spread, throwing the nation into uncertainty. For many, it was the end of a dictatorship, but for others, it marked the beginning of a dangerous power vacuum. But why did Kim Chae-gyu, one of Park's closest allies, decide to pull the trigger? Was it a personal vendetta, or did he believe he was saving the country from further tyranny? Even today, the motives behind the assassination remain a subject of intense debate. While the assassination marked the end of Park's authoritarian reign, it also plunged South Korea into a period of political instability that would take years to overcome. But on that fateful night, the only certainty was that South Korea would never be the same. The death of a dictator is often followed by uncertainty, and South Korea was no exception. Within hours of the assassination, the South Korean military and political elite scrambled to secure control of the government. Martial law was declared, and General Jong Sung-hwa, the army chief of staff, assumed temporary command, vowing to maintain order. But behind the scenes, a power struggle was brewing. Park's assassination had not only eliminated a president, it had shattered the carefully controlled hierarchy he had built. Factions within the government and military now vied for influence, each seeking to fill the void left by Park's sudden departure. The most immediate concern was the continuity of Park's economic policies. Under his rule, South Korea had undergone rapid industrialization, pulling itself from post-war poverty to become one of Asia's fastest-growing economies. Would his death derail this progress, or could the nation continue on its upward trajectory? Yet, beyond the economic questions, a deeper crisis loomed: political legitimacy. Park's Yushin constitution had allowed him to rule indefinitely, but his death now exposed the fragility of the system. Citizens, especially the younger generation and those who had protested against his regime, saw an opportunity for change. They demanded a new era of democracy and freedom, hoping that Park's death would bring an end to decades of authoritarianism. However, the path forward was anything but clear. General Chun Do-hwan, a rising figure in the military, quickly began consolidating power behind the scenes. As commander of the Defense Security Command, Chun maneuvered through the post-assassination chaos with one goal: seizing control of South Korea's political future. While the assassination marked the end of Park Chung-hee's personal rule, the political vacuum it created set the stage for new leadership, one that would come at a heavy cost to South Korea's journey toward democracy. As South Korea stood at this crossroads, the immediate aftermath was a mixture of fear, confusion, and a glimmer of hope for a different future. But that hope would soon be challenged as the country prepared to face yet another authoritarian regime in the years to come. In the power vacuum left by Park Chung-hee's assassination, one man was already positioning himself to take control: General Chun Do-hwan. As the commander of the Defense Security Command, Chun was no stranger to the inner workings of the South Korean military elite. His ambitions were clear, and within days of Park's death, Chun began laying the groundwork for his own rise to power. While General Jong Sung-hwa, as Army Chief of Staff, had initially taken temporary command, Chun quickly outmaneuvered him. Behind the scenes, he was consolidating key allies within the military and intelligence agencies. On December 12, 1979, just weeks after Park's assassination, Chun made his move. That night, Chun executed a military coup, arresting General Jong under the pretext of investigating Park Chung-hee's assassination. Chun seized control of the military chain of command, effectively sidelining those who stood in his way. His bold actions marked the beginning of his authoritarian rule. Chun's coup was swift and decisive, but it was just the first step. Over the next several months, he tightened his grip on power, suppressing political opposition and dismantling any remnants of democratic movements that had gained momentum after Park's death. However, Chun's rise was not without resistance. Many South Koreans had hoped that Park's assassination would lead to democratic reforms, but instead, they found themselves under the thumb of yet another military strongman. The student protests that had erupted during Park's rule only intensified under Chun's. The most tragic event during Chun's rise to power came in May 1980 in the city of Gwangju. What started as a peaceful protest calling for democratic reforms turned into a brutal military crackdown, known as the Gwangju Uprising. Chun's regime deployed paratroopers and army units to suppress the uprising, resulting in hundreds, if not thousands, of civilian deaths. The Gwangju massacre shocked the nation and the world, cementing Chun Do-hwan's reputation as a ruthless dictator. Though he had seized power, he did so at a heavy price, one that would leave deep scars in South Korea's collective memory. Chun's rise to power marked the continuation of military dictatorship in South Korea. He would rule until 1988, but his legacy, like that of Park Chung-hee, was marred by bloodshed, repression, and the ongoing struggle for democracy. Student movements became the heart of this growing resistance. Universities across the country were hotbeds of political activity, as students organized protests, sit-ins, and demonstrations against Chun's authoritarian rule. These protests were often met with harsh crackdowns by the government, but the movement only grew stronger. By the mid-1980s, the calls for change were no longer just coming from students and activists. South Korea's middle class, labor unions, and even members of the business community began to join the movement, recognizing that the country's future lay in democratic governance, not in military dictatorship. In response to this growing pressure, Chun tried to suppress the movement with more force, using the military and police to maintain order. But with each crackdown, the protests gained more international attention. Human rights abuses, censorship, and political repression under Chun's regime drew condemnation from global leaders and organizations. By 1987, the momentum for change was unstoppable. That year, a pivotal event shook the country. The death of student activist Park Jong-chul, who was tortured to death during an interrogation, ignited outrage across the nation. His death became a rallying point for the entire pro-democracy movement. Facing mounting internal and external pressure, Chun Do-hwan announced that he would not seek another term as president, and that South Korea would hold direct presidential elections. This concession marked a major turning point in the struggle for democracy. However, the battle for democracy wasn't fully won yet. Chun's successor, Roh Tae-woo, a close ally, was chosen by the ruling party to run in the presidential election. But under intense public scrutiny, the election process was more transparent than ever before, setting South Korea on a new democratic path. Despite the rocky transition, Chun's downfall symbolized the end of South Korea's long era of military dictatorship. The 1987 presidential election marked the first direct, democratic vote in over 2 decades, ushering in a new era of political openness and paving the way for South Korea's transformation into the vibrant democracy it is today. Chun Doo-hwan may have succeeded in taking power in the chaos following Park Chung-hee's assassination, but his downfall was a testament to the resilience and determination of the South Korean people. Their long fight for democracy would become a defining chapter in the nation's modern history. The pro-democracy movement of the 1980s not only brought down one dictator but also ensured that the country's future would be determined by the will of its people, setting the stage for the South Korea we know today.